What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 rogue decks for the June 2019 format. The WCQ season is in full swing. We just had 2 WCQs take place this past weekend, as well as several large nationals, but that doesn't mean we are finished. We still have several nationals that have yet to occur. I believe we have the South American WCQ taking place this upcoming weekend at the time of recording this video, not to mention we have the North American and European WCQs following shortly thereafter, and we have a few rogue contenders that have managed to emerge, so I want to update you guys on what these rogue strategies are, which ones are seeing the most success, so that you can either take advantage of that and maybe play one of these strategies if you don't like playing meta, or if you're planning on going to one of these events, that way you're prepared knowing what rogue strategies are seeing more play, so that you can best prepare to combat these strategies in case you happen to play against them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Kicking things off with number 5, I've got Subterror. Now, Subterror is a deck that we haven't really seen emerge here too often. It does manage to make day 2 actually at a lot of these events quite a bit. It did get a top or 2 at these past few nationals from the previous weekend, but Subterror is a very interesting deck. So Subterror Guru is kind of the heart and soul of this deck. The fact that it has the ability to kind of Book of Moon itself as well as a monster at a spell speed 2 speed if you control another Subterror card is actually very strong against the majority of the meta, specifically because of Salamangreat and Orcus. You can kind of just halt their link plays entirely, and it really hurts the deck because it may not just completely stop them, but it slows them down just enough you can put them at your deck's tempo, and when Subterror is getting to play the game that it wants to play, it is a very difficult deck to stop. Subterror also has access to one of the craziest hand traps in the game in Subterror Fiendus, basically allowing you to negate whatever the hell you want just as long as you control a Subterror card that is face up that you can flip face down, and it is just an absolute blowout because being able to stop whatever is just a power that no other hand trap has. Subterror is positioned favorably in the rogue tier category just because it can play Floodgates to slow the opponent down. It can even take advantage of Mystic Mine if it really wanted to, because it is a deck that plays Terraforming and incorporates field spells, so that way it can slow the opponent down to play its game, but then when it wants to go and be more aggressive, you can go ahead and just play your Hidden City over it, just kind of go ahead and get in for some damage because you have Subterror Final Battle to double the damage that you would deal. It's just got a lot of really interesting tools, and it's a very difficult deck to deal with, especially if you do not know how to combat it. The deck obviously has its weaknesses in the fact that spell and trap removal can hurt it tremendously if you're able to stop stuff like their Floodgates to kind of allow yourself to play your own game at a much faster tempo, but regardless, that doesn't take away from the fact that Subterror is still a pretty decent rogue option for what it's worth, and that's why I gave it my number 5 spot. But coming in at number 4, you know, we have a lot of these graveyard reliant strategies running around, and DD Crow seems like a pretty decent card at the moment, but what if you could play a deck that's comprised entirely of monsters that have DD Crow-like effects? Well, that's why my number 4 pick is Infernoid. Now, Infernoid actually did manage to garner a couple of tops this past weekend, and Infernoid is positioned in a rather interesting spot just because of the fact that the Infernoid cards are acting as DD Crows that are pretty much all throughout your deck. So the fact you have in-archetype DD Crows means when you go up against your Salamangreat or your Orcus, hell, even Sky Striker, and I guess to an extent Danger Thunder Dragon as well matchups, you actually have the way to manipulate the graveyard and really put a stop to a lot of their plays. I mean, we see that these graveyard manipulative cards are coming up. That's why cards like Dweller are so strong, so on and so forth. But Infernoid just has a lot of really cool tools at its disposal. I mean, it has the ability to set up multiple negates with a card like Void Feast, which has a really big boon in the fact that Trap Trick allows you to search Void Feast, meaning you can play 6 effective copies of it instead of 3, making it your ultimate blowout card if you go first. I think it's still incredibly difficult for a lot of decks to play through a Void Feast, which ends up resolving in pretty much setting up a board that's very hard for a lot of the current decks to deal with. You've got massive powerhouses in Ononku and Deviati being able to blow up and just heavy storm or Raigeki the board respectively, but also negate spell or trap or monster effects depending on which ones you have on the board. Infernoid just has a lot of really cool things and always manages to be this deck that can take advantage of a particular metagame, especially when the graveyard plays a very pivotal role. Now, obviously, Infernoid does have its weaknesses. I mean, there's a consistency issue. Sometimes your hands are just going to be really awkward and sometimes unplayable, more so than most decks, especially when you compare them to the consistency of the top tier decks. The restrictions make them a little bit difficult to play, not to mention they do just have have some very unique interactions that you have to be cognizant of to ensure that you play the deck appropriately. However, the deck does have plenty of tools at its disposal, and especially when we're in a graveyard-centric format, Infernoid tends to pop up because it handles these decks in a very anti-meta style-ish approach that no other deck has the ability to do. So for those reasons, that's why I gave Infernoid my number 4 spot. Now coming in at number 3, we have a deck that has managed to stick around the rogue tier category for quite some time now, although it's fallen out of favor recently, and I think there's a few reasons for that, but that deck is True Draco. Now when it comes to Draco, I think Draco was so well positioned previously when Mystic Mine saw a massive resurgence in play, and I'm not even talking about Mystic Mine just being played in, you know, Sky Striker or whatever decks may play it just as an extra tool at their disposal, but more so I'm talking about Mystic Mine Burn specifically, just because Draco had such a strong matchup against that deck, it was basically a free win for it. However, Draco has managed to stick around this format as kind of one of those decks that always manages to sneak in a top at a YCS or above level, and this is really no different. But I think recently the deck has fallen out of favor just because the other 4 top decks, which I've discussed in my top 5 meta decks, have basically just shown that they can outpower the deck entirely. I think one of the other reasons as well is that due to Mystic Mine being a threat, a lot of decks are main decking spell and trap removal, which was one of the advantages that Draco had, playing all these different floodgate cards to slow the opponent down, while the Draco monsters help generate themselves advantage and can kind of just overwhelm the opponent that way. You know, now when you've got Twin Twister basically being played in every single deck, it makes these back row decks a little bit weaker in that regard. However, Draco still does have a lot of good things going for it. It's extremely consistent because you get to play so many powerful draw spells. It's able to play going first by setting up floodgates or going second by being able to break the opponent's board with the True Draco spell and trap cards. Again, it does have the fact that it is a stun slash control deck, so it doesn't have a lot of aggressive tools at its disposal. However, if Draco can get the opponent to play the game that it wants to play, and if it can manage to go first more often than not, it's going to see a lot of success. So again, just because Mystic Mine has fallen out of favor and the other 4 decks have started to just implement a lot more spell and trap hate, I think that's the reason why Draco has fallen, but it still managed to have a minor amount of success, and that's why I gave it my number 3 spot. But coming in at number 2, we have probably the ultimate fan favorite when it comes to rogue decks, and that is Cyber Dragon. Now, Cyber Dragon is uniquely positioned in this metagame because it does things that no other deck really does. I mean, it can turn any Cyber Dragon into effective removal for monsters in the opponent's extra monster zone, and that's crazy. Like, there's no way to really stop that. So when you're going up against decks like Sky Striker, it's easy for you to remove the Sky Striker Ace Link monster without them recurring the Ray, and then you can just go in and kill them because you're playing Cyber Dragon. Same thing goes for Salamangreat. You're able to dodge stuff like Salamangreat Balinx's protection ability because, again, it's not being destroyed, you're contact fusing it off. So having that ability is absolutely crazy. Cyber Dragon also has the ability to blind second, which I don't really think any other deck has the ability to do as well, at the moment at least, as well as Cyber Dragon. And the benefit of that is that you can build your deck going second and play some extremely powerful going second cards that other decks would not want to incorporate. I mean, you can play Evenly Matched. Like, yes, you relinquish your battle phase if you play it, but Evenly Matched is a blowout against some of the top decks of the format. And so yeah, while you relinquish your battle phase, you can just go forth then with the remaining 5 cards in your hand and set up an unbreakable board with multiple negations that your opponent probably isn't going to be able to play through because they expended so many resources on their turn 1 board. You also just have the fact that Cyber Dragon is just an OTK machine. I mean, if there's anything that Cyber Dragons is good at, it's killing the opponent in 1 battle phase. So not to mention Cyber Dragon Master just added a complete new layer of consistency to the deck that makes the deck actually very solid in the rogue tier category. We've seen it day 2, we saw it top the previous weekend. This is a very threatening deck depending on the specific matchup. I think it has an incredibly good Sky Striker and Salamangreat matchup for what it's worth. Orcus is like okay, but I don't think Danger Thunder Dragon is anything too good. But for the most part, I mean, Salamangreat's making up a majority of the meta with Sky Striker not too far behind. So maybe if the pairings work in your favor and you're playing Cyber Dragon, you could go really far, but that's why I wanted to give Cyber Dragon my number 2 spot. So that's gonna bring us to my number 1 rogue deck of the June 2019 format. And if you haven't already figured it out, I'm going with Altergeist. Now, it seems that not too long ago, Altergeist was on no one's radar whatsoever, and then out of nowhere, it managed to win the German National. And then ever since then, this deck has had a massive resurgence in play, and that's very interesting considering the fact that the WCQs are now in full swing. So why is that? Well, when you look at Altergeist on paper, it actually has a lot of very interesting things going for it. I mean, it's a control style deck, meaning it can incorporate a lot of hand traps, so that's very good for covering your combo matchups like Danger Thunder Dragon and Orcust. Because it's a combo deck, or excuse me, because it's a control deck, you have the ability to go toe-to-toe with the other control decks being Salamangreat and Sky Striker, but you've got a lot of cool tools to handle those matchups in the form of stuff like Secret Village of the Spellcasters. When you're going up against your Striker matchup, if you can stick a Secret Village, Sky Striker most likely does not have an out. And then you have stuff like Multi-Faker, which in tandem with Infinite Impermanence for a turn 0 play can be absolutely stunning for anyone who's going up against the deck. You also have ways to handle cards like Mystic Mine and a card like Compulsory Evacuation Device, which happens to be a trap card, which means you can return monsters to your hand to level out the monsters on the field, and then you can also use that same card proactively against your opponent's plays to prevent them from link summoning, so on and so forth. You also have the ability just to play a huge slew of trap cards, and yeah, sure, while spell and trap removal is on a rise, especially because of Mystic Mine being in the format, Altergeist really doesn't care too much about it. It doesn't exactly play floodgates necessarily. I mean, it can, but it typically doesn't. I think most thing you have to worry about is the spell speed 3 removal that it's going to play in terms of Solemn Strike, Warning, and Judgment. But even then, most of its back row is chainable. I mean, you've got stuff like Personal Spoofing. You've got all these different cards, not to mention Pot of Extravagance, helping add consistency to the deck. The deck is actually just positioned rather well when you look at it. It's kind of like very similar to Striker and Salamangreat in terms of like what benefits they provide going against the other combo decks, but because it's a control deck itself, it can go toe-to-toe and grind against those other decks, giving it a favorable matchup all around. So Altergeist might be one of the sleeper decks for the WCQs, and that's why I have to give it my #1 spot. So guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.